How's it going, Publius?
It's going, Mod. It's going. Feeling excited about the status of BIP 22 and BIP 23, which both seem to have hit quorum in the past couple of hours. So that's exciting, and they only have like two and a half hours left. So down to the wire, but cool stuff.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that and see that as well. And I guess maybe bid participation would be one of the topics that we can discuss today as well.
As always, everything is on the table.
Sounds good. Okay, before we start off with questions, and we already have a few of them in the town hall chat, and to everyone who's joining us now, please feel free to drop your questions there. Can we maybe look into a quick summary or a brief summary of what happened the past week on the protocol level? So the joke on the Discord that the stablecoin is too stable, and that's what we have seen, and good to hear as well. We had an incident once where there was a relatively large exit, that left the protocol. And we also saw how Beanstalk handled that. Can you maybe take us through the week and that specific incident as well?
Sure. So too stable is probably not the case. In terms of good, better, best, the thing that's staring us in the face is that because you have a fee in the Bean 3 curve pool, that there is some friction around maintaining a perfect peg. So while the delta B has been very close to $1 basically every season within a couple of thousand, with the exception of that one season that you mentioned, it's been a low volatility couple of days. And nonetheless, the bean supply has continued to grow slowly but steadily. There have been mints relatively consistently, and I think generally low volatility, positive carry is the name of the game. So an exciting week overall. And as we've spoken about, the longer the contracts are up and running, the better we can all feel about the model and the security of it. But this is a long-term game, so we're only about a little over a week into this collectively. Now, there was one exciting event, which was that there was a large withdrawal of around 2.5 million BDV, most of it in liquidity, from a single wallet that was that the money had come in after the replant. And so there's a couple things that are noteworthy. One is that the price went down to 92.5 cents or so because there was about 1.3 million beans that were sold or sell pressure in practice. So the delta B went to negative 1.2 something million beans and was quickly converted and bought back to peg within, I think it was like 15 minutes or so, which was pretty exciting to see the convert in action. And that was in and of itself an exciting event. Now, the reality is that the system did mint like 200,000 soil, I think it was, and we saw that soil quickly get sown. But the reality is that since the price had already returned to $1, the system probably didn't need to issue that much soil. And so that's one place where there's a potential efficiency improvement, which is that if not using the minimum of the current delta B and the time weighted average delta B, because that can be manipulated, perhaps using like a 5-block average right before the sunrise or something like that, where if the prices return to the peg at the end of the season, Beanstalk doesn't need to issue as much soil. But that would be the only inefficiency that was really on display in that case, and generally thought the system performed pretty well given the circumstances. Now, since then, the price has been pretty much steadily at peg, and the reality is that there aren't too many other assets to be sold, given that the most of the assets are still unripe and the chop percentage remains pretty high. So that's a brief overview of what's been going on over the past week or so. And generally pretty exciting.
Is this a good example of showing that's how stockholders are providing utility in the protocol, where they're not just like staking their tokens, they're actively participating in peg maintenance?
Definitely. And whereas normally I think you think of the pod holders or the lenders as the ones creating the utility, because that's where a lot of the stability comes from. Now with Convert having such a meaningful part in peg maintenance, stockholders are also starting to create their own utility, because they obviously have been exposure to some capacity. So it's creating utility by providing peg maintenance support.
Great. All right. Wanted to discuss a little bit one of the topics that are being discussed under the governance channel, which is now is being called the Dutch auction for soil. And we've previously touched on this idea before, which is on the start of every season, the temperature would start from 0 to the current temperature, and there would be an auction on whoever buys soil first at the lowest temperature gets it. What are your thoughts on this being a priority to Beanstalk? Would this right now save that to Beanstalk, or it's not really where we want to put our focus on?
So at the margin, that is probably somewhere that the amount of debt Beanstalk is issuing can be minimum. So at the moment, the temperature is like 5,400%, and it's coming down and has been coming down for a couple of weeks if you go back prior to the replant, but nonetheless remains pretty high. And if you look at the implied temperature based on the price of the beans in the pod marketplace, it does seem that Beanstalk is overpaying somewhat significantly in order at the moment. And so the concept of introducing some sort of, and I think a Dutch auction generally works as a structure, is an interesting way to minimize the cost of Beanstalk borrowing beans, but it's not so gas efficient to implement. And so implementing an on-chain auction every hour is, it's interesting, but probably not a priority at the moment, but definitely something to think more about. It's an interesting concept.
All right. Let's talk a bit about the BIPs and participating in BIPs in general. Since Unpause, or even before that, let's say since maybe even before Exploit, Beanstalk has a lot of BIPs that gets proposed. And so far, the BIP, for a BIP to pass, it needs a relatively high quorum, which is 50% for. And most, say, all BIPs have passed in general, but we've seen lately that what we might think or see as like a voter fatigue. What are your thoughts in general about how BIPs are right now? There have been some ideas, proposed, such as vote delegation. Another thing that we can do maybe is reward, voters. So if you vote, you get some sort of a reward. Maybe change the voting system completely. Someone posted in the governance channel an idea about, a different sort of voting called apparent consensus, and we can talk about what that is like. What are your thoughts in general on our current system, the BIP participation, and if it needs any amendment or changes?
So, in general, it's important that systems that are trying to create money, like Beanstalk, are not easy to manipulate or change the money policy, the monetary policy, if you want to call it, of the system. The goal is to have Beanstalk be difficult to change. And the concept of a 50% requirement of voting in favor of a change to the protocol is not a requirement per se, but is certainly a way to ensure that the majority of the value held in the system, or at least in the silo, is aligned with the direction of the changes of the protocol. And to some extent, whether a third would be sufficient as opposed to a half, maybe. But again, the goal is to make Beanstalk difficult to change. And so unless the proposed changes to the protocol are really attractive, the goal is not to have Beanstalk be easy to change. So there needs to be compelling reasons to change the protocol. Now, delegation, reality is that there's nothing that you can do to prevent someone from at some point creating like a wrapper such that there is delegation. But that is one of the places where I think we're very hesitant to encourage that in any capacity, because at some point then you do have a centralization and decision making. And while it may encourage higher participation in terms of total stock, it's likely going to encourage much lower participation in terms of users and significant stockholders that are paying attention to governance closely. So historically, perhaps with the exception of a couple of BIPs, it doesn't seem like participation has been the main issue. And having people actively vote at the threshold of 50% stock, and the fact that the vast majority of BIPs have passed that threshold, don't think it's fair to classify the DAO as having a participation issue in any capacity. So recognize that the votes are stressful and there's a lot of work that goes into this stuff. And if they don't pass, it can be like, well, what the fuck are we doing here? You know, like why is anyone working on developing this stuff if then the DAO's not going to just vote for it? But at the end of the day, making sure that the DAO is comfortable with the changes is essential. And what that threshold of approval is perhaps can be changed depending on the type of change, right? Over time, maybe adding a token to the whitelist it requires a different threshold than changing a rule of the monetary policy. So there's no right answer, but think that in general, keeping with a higher threshold is going to help ensure the integrity of Beanstalk and of beans as money.
What about rewarding those who vote? Can we think of voters as also like participants, and the protocol will reward you if you vote? Is this something?
Well, there's a couple problems. One is if you have permissionless governance where anyone can propose a BIP, now anyone can propose a BIP and then vote for a BIP or vote against a BIP and collect some sort of reward from the system. So the question is, well, what BIPs are entitled to rewards? And that's where you start to lose the permissionlessness. So not sure that's so easy to do.
Yeah, that's a very good point. All right, we can start with some of the questions. And we have a comment on an earlier thing that we discussed, which is, I think, the gas and how gas intensive a Dutch auction would be. And Alex proposes a solution that the function can just read, the time of the season, so it doesn't have to like actively calculate. Okay, Xsalad asks, do you have like a simple explanation of how the A parameter in the curve pool impacts the delta, and how that would impact also minting?
Sure. So in practice, the A parameter determines how close to a constant product or a constant sum the invariant on the curve pool is. And the higher the A parameter, the closer to the constant sum formula the pool is. And what that means in practice is that when you have a higher A parameter, given an imbalance in the pool as a percentage of the pool, the price is going to be closer to the peg. And for a lower A parameter, given that same ratio in the pool, you're going to have a price that's further from the peg. And so the question is how to have the price change in line with the ratio in the pool, and whether you want the price to be sensitive to changes in the price, changes in the ratio of the pool or not. And there was a lot of discussion that happened around what was the appropriate A parameter for the Bean 3 curve pool, and an A of 1 was selected, which is slightly more concentrated around the peg than is a constant product pool, but not by much. And in practice, that means that there is a decent amount of Bean price volatility for a given ratio in the pool or imbalance in the pool. And the fact that the Bean price has been so close to the peg, despite having a relatively low A parameter is very encouraging from a peg maintenance perspective. So if there had been a higher A parameter when that $2.5 million withdrawal of LP came, a higher A parameter would have resulted in a lower deviation in the price, which would have made converting less attractive. So one of the benefits of having a lower A parameter is that converting is attractive for stockholders, and there is a way to make additional stock by participating in peg maintenance actively. And as we were talking about earlier, when you consider that there's a fee in these pools, having a lower A parameter where you have more price volatility can help offset the fee, the friction from the fee around converting and peg maintenance. So a lower A parameter is helpful for a lot of different reasons, particularly when you consider that Beanstalk is trying to oscillate the bean price above and below the peg, not have it just stay flat, slightly above or slightly below the peg, like a lot of other stable coins.
Okay. Harry asks a few questions. Maybe we can take them one by one. Starting off with the Bean ETH pool, when that is introduced, how will the delta be calculated or derived across the different pools?
So it's likely to be a similar calculation to the one prior to the replant for the Bean ETH pool, which is the ratio of beans to ETH relative to the ratio of USDC to ETH in another pool. And that will be the way to figure out whether the price of bean is too high or too low relative to ETH and by how much in the pool.
Okay. Second question is about the Beanstalk DEX. So last week we had a good overview. Harry is asking if you can summarize that again and then include if there have been any new developments to the Beanstalk DEX.
So at a high level, the DEX is going to be, we think, a liquidity vacuum within crypto. And the reason for that is that there's so much friction around trading at the moment as a result of trading fees that don't need to exist. And when you consider that beans, due to their positive carry, are the most attractive stablecoin to have different assets trading against, when you combine liquid pools with zero fees, using a Beanstalk native DEX becomes quite attractive. So there's not too much to give in terms of an update. Development is well underway on the first pool, which will be a constant product pool of Bean ETH. And from a lingo perspective, thinking of calling them wells instead of pools. And the concept there is that wells constantly replenish, and particularly replenished when there's rain. And when there's rain, there are beans minted, and the beans are constantly replenishing the well. So that would be the only update, and it's not really a substantive one, but nonetheless, we like continuing to play on the metaphor.
I look forward to how well becomes a coin in DeFi. Any updates on Root? Mr. Manifold, you're in the audience if you'd like to come up and share that. Let's see. How are you, Manifold?
I'm doing good, Mod. How are you? What's up, Publius? How are you?
All is well here.
GM, sir.
GM, brother. So on the Root front, it's looking like Root is going to propose a BIP within the next week or so. One of the things that we want to be able to facilitate is a fungible deposited bean. And in order to do that, there are some upgrades and updates we're going to kind of need to request from Beanstalk. And so that is probably the most important update on the Root end, and something, Harry, to keep an eye out for in the coming days. It'll likely be BIP 24.
Thank you, Manifold.
Very, very cool that there's now, a private company starting to work on code for Beanstalk and propose it as a BIP. And one thing to add is that Root has been generous enough to fund a 6-month agreement with Beanstalk, with Halborn, to continue to audit Beanstalk. And the result is that BIP 24 will be audited by Halborn prior to proposal, is our understanding.
Might be a conflict of interest there, Publius. We'll see, brother.
With regards to?
Root funding the Halborn retainer.
That's more of an inside joke.
Sarcasm.
Oh, apologies. I'm out of touch with the inside jokes, I guess.
I think the next question was how's the Halborn agreement, and I believe Publius, you just gave a summary where Manifold you had a call with Halborn today. Maybe you can give an update if there's anything else other than what Publius shared.
Sure. So there's two different aspects of the Halborn agreement. One is the retainer to continuously audit any new code, and another is the Seraph agreement. And so we're making good progress there. In particularly on the Seraph agreement side, there's still some open questions that we're working through, and hopefully we can get cleared up in the near future. But it's a new product, it's a new service from Halborn, and it's the first of its kind. So typically when you're working through legal documentation for something that's new and novel, there are some sticking points that you got to sort through, and so we're kind of in that phase. But hopefully within the next day or so, we have it cleaned up and signed.
Thank you, Manifold, for the update.
And to add to that, there's so much that once Halborn is retained for them to work on. So there's a couple projects. One is what Manifold suggested with BIP 24. The hope is to have the UI audited such that it can quickly be open sourced after the UI audit is complete. And then we'd like to also have Halborn start a complete re-audit of Beanstalk from scratch as sort of a continuous auditing process. So there's lots of good activity for them to be working on, and we're excited to get that relationship back up and running after a brief reprieve since they finished the audit.
Yeah, and the front end going open source is a big step for the protocol in general. Next question is how many devs are currently working for the DAO? It's a bit unclear to give you an answer now, just given that there are still people who are contributing to Beanstalk who aren't hired. But officially, the only ones who are hired right now are the ones who had proposals passed. Now that the budget is passed, expect that we will have more contributors being onboarded. Next question is, and Publius, feel free to add on anything there.
Yeah, I would say as a great example of that, had a nice call with Maltese and Beanjoyer today, and they've been hard at work upgrading the pod marketplace, and think that another thing that will be ready for Halborn in the next couple of weeks for them to start auditing will be some major upgrades to the pod marketplace, and think that the structure of the pod marketplace as it's being worked on is really cool in general. And God willing will be a template for lots of different other markets that are built on top of Beanstalk. So very excited for the work that they've been up to. And it's hard to define. Are they working for the DAO? Are they, what are people's relationships to the DAO? Hard to say, but lots of different controls on all different parts of the stack at the moment. So pretty incredible the amount of output happening from lots of different places. Like the root developers are also separate. So very cool.
When can we expect a variable APY on the website?
Don't think I'm the right guy to answer.
Chad, feel free to answer it if you would like to.
Might have a bit.
Okay, next question. Can you explain how convert works? What happens when you convert when the price is above 1 or below 1?
So in practice, the way convert works is it changes the ratio of your position of beans and LP tokens within the silo. So LP tokens are a portion bean and a portion of assets that are not beans, whereas deposited beans are entirely beans. And so when the price is too high, you can convert your beans into LP tokens, which are part beans and part not beans. In order to get the part that's not beans, beans are sold. So when converts happen above the peg, beans are sold and by the protocol and converted into LP tokens. Whereas when the price is below $1, beans don't need to be bought. And in practice, the thing to note about Curve is Curve supports adding LP tokens, adding liquidity on either side. So it's not that beans are actually sold into non-beans, in this case 3 Curve, but in practice, the conversion has the effect of lowering the delta B in the pool. So in practice, the beans are just added to the liquidity pool. And then vice versa, when the price is too low, beans are just removed from the pool. So you have these LP tokens that are a ratio of beans and 3 Curve, and when the price is too low, that means there's too many beans in the pool, and so when you convert LP tokens to beans, beans are just removed from the pool. So at its base level, a convert is just adding beans to the pool or removing beans from the pool.
All right. Chai Kitty asks, the idea of having grown stock is to retain or to introduce an opportunity cost for those who want to exit the silo. Given that unripe assets are anyways vested and have a high penalty, why still reward them with grown stock?
So the concept is that unripe assets should continue to function as normal deposits, with the exception of the goal being to prevent them functioning as exit liquidity. So the top percent is designed to highly align the incentives between those purchasing fertilizer, effectively recapitalizing the unripe assets, and those with unripe assets. Where if you have unripe assets, the value of the unripe assets may be increasing as fertilizer is sold, but you're not able to sell against those people that recapitalized until they have been paid back as fertilizer fertilizes sprouts. So it's a question of incentive alignment, but there's no reason to additionally penalize those people with revitalized stock and seeds and unripe assets because of the fact that they had assets in Beanstalk before the exploit.
Next question asks, what's the relationship between the Bean 3 Curve pool and the amount of fertilizer sold? Why does the amount of fertilizer changes when there are changes to the Bean 3 Curve pool?
So it's not that the amount of fertilizer sold changes, it's that the amount of fertilizer that can be sold will change. Now, the concept is that the protocol is trying to recapitalize the $77 million in liquidity that was stolen from the protocol. But in practice, the way that it was implemented is that it's looking to recapitalize a fixed amount of LP tokens. Now, the amount of LP tokens that the amount of fertilizer that needs to be sold in order to create the right amount of LP tokens changes as the ratio in the pool changes. Does that make sense?
Yes, and if that wasn't clear, please ask us and we'll follow up or expand on the answer. Next question asks, what are the priorities for Beanstalk Farms and maybe Beanstalk the protocol in general for the next 3 to 6 months?
So there's lots of different good stuff going on, and recently had a call with a lot of the people at Beanstalk Farms to try to get an understanding of that as well. And it seems like there's a lot of different work happening on the UI to get it fully up to speed and add all of the functionality for the new version of Beanstalk, and similarly getting the subgraph up and running to support the UI, and having both the subgraph migrated to the decentralized graph network and having the UI code open sourced after an audit. Those are major projects happening at the moment. Additionally, There's a lot of work happening for protocol development at Beanstalk Farms, particularly the starting to work on the DEX, the converts associated with that, and all of the necessary support around that. And then there's a lot of different work happening to organize with Halborn, the Seraph BIP, putting together the playbook, as Seraph calls it, around that structure and getting that up and running. And then as well, trying to coordinate a lot of different stuff with the different participants in the Beanstalk ecosystem, like Root, like some of the permits that hopefully Beansprout is going to work on. A lot of different stuff for Beanstalk Farms to sort of coordinate to make sure that everything is up and running and that the UI is functioning as well with all these changes happening. So lots of different moving pieces to coordinate. And perhaps I'm not the best person to speak on this. Perhaps some of the people on the Beanstalk Farms Council want to come up and talk about what they view as the priorities for Beanstalk Farms.
A follow-up to that question is, in specific, what about business development? I think Root has a lot to add to that.
I think Beansprout is really going to hopefully continue to be the hub for that and function as a seed or incubator for lots of different projects and businesses to start to build on top of Beanstalk. So Root was a great example of the success of Beansprout I almost said last year, but prior to the exploit and prior to the replant, and Root continues to, or has started to really pay dividends for Beanstalk, and is evidence that the funding of Beansprout has been very productive, and hopefully other projects will start to grow out of Beansprout as well.
Totally, and I can add a little bit to that at a more granular level. So there's really I like to bifurcate it in terms of on-chain and off-chain development, and what I mean by that is we are certainly looking for entrepreneurs and developers who are looking to build protocols or additional utility on chain for beans. That's incredibly healthy, and it's needed to drive demand. But also equally as interested in the development of a BDV economy that potentially has real world assets or underlying cash flows for businesses that are off chain, in which these assets or businesses operate a portion or all of their books, hopefully, in beans. And I think both of those things are equally important. And so hopefully over the next 3 to 6 months, we make significant progress there, and can fund and support and provide resources to teams and individuals who are entrepreneurial and want to go out and operate within a BDV economy. And that's really, in my opinion, what starts to make this economic engine really tick.
Thank you, Manifold. Any plans to make beans cross-chain?
So the thinking at the moment is that the development of Beanstalk will continue to happen on Ethereum mainnet for the foreseeable future. The concept is that over time we could see Bean itself, or a version of a fungible deposited asset, being bridged to Ethereum layer 2s. But beyond that, no plans at the moment. Cross-chain stuff is really difficult, and at the moment focused more on upgrading and continuing to improve the main economic model of Beanstalk.
Amir Hodderberry asks, so he's a bit wary or not sure about pursuing a prediction market, and hopes that we have more discussion about that. So the prediction market will be run by Root, which is a private and independent company. But maybe Publius, you can share a bit of your thoughts on what the prediction market would be like on Beanstalk, and then Manifold, you can also talk about how independent that is from Beanstalk.
So there's a couple things to be said. One is that there's no reason to be wary of pursuing anything on top of Beanstalk. I think in general we should be encouraging of experimentation and development, and in development in a transparent way, and the hope is that the cream will rise to the top. So in general, I think being wary of development is not the right attitude. Now, with regards to prediction markets in particular, we do happen to think that it's a very attractive thing to build on top of Beanstalk in the short term, because people already have silo positions collecting yield, and then the ability to use those silo positions to bet on different things, whether that's Beanstalk interest rates or Sunday football. That's a very compelling thing to do, given that there's no opportunity cost associated with participating in those markets. So if you look at the current structure of on-chain prediction markets, their main problem is a lack of liquidity, which we believe is from opportunity cost associated with providing liquidity. But if you create the prediction markets on top of the silo, there is no opportunity cost associated with markets, and therefore it should be able to attract a significant amount of liquidity. And that's also why the pod marketplace development and starting to develop really sophisticated order books is an exciting piece of development as well, because there's going to be lots of different sophisticated markets hopefully built on top of this thing.
And agree with all that. Hodelberry, a couple comments that I would add is that we're dealing with permissionless on-chain technology, and so kind of like Publius mentioned, really anything can be developed by anyone on top of Beans, and so there's nothing really stopping anyone or any entity from pursuing or developing a prediction market, and so again, we think that it's something and worth pursuing for all the reasons that Publius mentioned. But also notable is that Beanstalk Farms or Beanstalk isn't investing anything into it from a development perspective, from a financial perspective. The sole purpose really of these prediction markets at a high level is to facilitate demand for beans, because we think it'll be a good product. So hopefully that helps ease some of your concerns, but just thought I'd add that.
Thank you for the answer. Xsalad asks if there is like a default day rate or a fee for contributors, thinking that why would we have some contributors like paid and others who aren't yet. So right now, no one is paid Xsalad. The proposals that have passed were passed for the Beanstalk Farms committee, where anyone can propose to be on the Beanstalk Farms committee. But the idea of the committee is for it to be able to then hire contributors. So now that the budget passed, expect everyone who's
not yet 2 more hours, just under 2 more hours, but hopefully they will pass.
Yeah, when it hopefully passes, then Beanstalk Farms will be able to onboard the other contributors so that they're all paid. So right now no one is being paid, but in the future hopefully everyone contributing to Beanstalk will be paid. With regards to a grant, there is a community grant program that hopefully will also be introduced on passing of the BIP, and then that will be have more of that free, let's say, fee or daily rate based on like on basis projects, let's say. A question on why are Unripe assets allowed to be converted?
The concept is that the liquidity in the Unripe assets is locked within Beanstalk. It can't be withdrawn or sold, or the vast majority of it can't because of the chop rate. But nonetheless, it's either liquidity or beans. And the people that are, let's call it stuck in the silo, those people are highly incentivized to help maintain the peg, because the more that Beanstalk is able to maintain the peg, the more likely it is that they get paid back. So it's highly aligned for those converters to be able to help participate in peg maintenance.
Saruchad answered the earlier question about having a variable APY on the UI, and his answer is that generally speaking, the minimum number or days that we want to show an average for is 30 days. So just given that Beanstalk unposed, we don't have that much data to show. So after 30 days, we might hopefully see an APY on the UI. Binology asks, why did the pod line go from 690 million to 745 on April 9, because he didn't see a big price dip or anything like that. He feels like he missed something, and I think you did indeed miss something, Beanology. We kind of touched on it earlier on, but Publius, you might give a quick answer.
So this was the result of the season where there was the LP removal of 2.5 million beans or so, and the result was that the time-weighted average price for the season was significantly below $1, and even though the price wasn't significantly below $1, the delta B was something like minus 200,000, and therefore there was a significant amount of pods issued. That goes to our comment from earlier that perhaps using some sort of minimum between the current delta B or something close to it and the average over the season is a better way to issue soil.
Benjamin asks, and this is more of a topic that has been discussed.
You got to finish the name. It's a great name, Mod. Come on.
Benjamin Stalken. It is a good name. So Benjamin Stalken asks, and that's a topic that has been discussed in other channels, which the overall topic is how can we reduce Beanstalk's debt? And in this example, it says what we can do is have pod holders exchange, their pods for a certain amount of stock that's minted by the silo, let's say, or the protocol. What do you think about that, Publius?
So, as a principle, there's no stock that's ever issued without beans associated with it, and therefore probably doesn't make sense to do that. Separately, it is interesting to think about other ways for Beanstalk to minimize its current outstanding debt obligation, but it's hard given the nature of the first in, first out structure to really do that, and trading pods for stock isn't very effective because of the fact that stock is currently only issued if there's underlying BDB.
Discus 2 follows up on his business development question, and he says that it seems most of business development is outsourced or aspirational. So there is... Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry to cut you off there, Mod. So I guess what I would say to that, Discus 2, is, when you refer to outsourcing, what I in my head imagine is, independent teams and entrepreneurs building on top of Beanstalk and or denominating portions of their balance sheets or all of their balance sheets in beans. Consider the US dollar. There's healthcare businesses running on US dollars. There's real estate businesses running on US dollars. There's agricultural businesses running on US dollars. And all of these businesses are privately owned entities and entrepreneurs that are independently incentivized and aligned to build. And so, when we talk about building a BDV economy, it's certainly aspirational. In my opinion, I think Beanstalk is the most aspirational project in crypto today. And so, I think you're spot on. It's absolutely aspirational, but, we're trying to merge, aspirations with reality here. And that's really the only way that, Beanstalk, which is a credit-based issuer of fiat money, is successful in the long term and grows sustainably with real underlying cash flows, with real on-chain usage that is sustainable. And so, in terms of the biz dev strategy, any entrepreneurs, businesses, or teams that want to work on top of Beanstalk, build businesses that denominate, portions of their books and beans, etc., are all welcome with open, wide arms. We want to work with you. Our message is clear. We want, hopefully by this time next year, there's 100 independent teams working in and around Beanstalk.
Hope that answers that, Discus 2, and feel free to follow up on that if it's not. Xsalad asks a question, and I'm not sure if I understand.
Just real quick, based on the chat, I was mistaken, and the withdrawal of LP of 2.5 million was not on August 9th. It was after August 9th. There was a separate period on August 9th where the delta B was negative, and Beanstalk issued around 1 million new soil based on the chat, but got a little confused with the dates there. Apologies for that.
that will be me too, because I thought he was referring as well to that incident. Exiled asks, and I'm not sure if I understand you correctly, which is what impact does the Ethereum upgrade have on Beanstalk?
As far as we understand it, not too much, particularly given that there's no Bean ETH pool. Perhaps it would be a little bit more interesting if there was a Bean ETH pool and then Beans on the fork, the proof of work version of Ethereum had some liquidity against it. But it seems like the Beanstalk that will thrive will be whatever chain the 3 curve has value on. So therefore, the assumption is the proof of stake chain will be the one with value. And it is just worth saying that it's a suboptimal situation to be in, that the chain that Beanstalk lives on is sort of at the decision of other entities and centralized entities. But over time, perhaps as Beanstalk scales, stockholders will have more of a say in these types of decisions.
Tyler asks if Beanstalk has any plans to attract more liquidity.
Well, I think Beanstalk, and in general, the plan is just to continue to create utility by being at PEG, and over time, hopefully, businesses are attracted to start using and building on top of Beanstalk because of the positive carry of beans. So slow and steady wins the race here.
Nasdaq wanted to follow up on how the delta B works. So the delta B is time weighted, and given that we in some seasons we're at PEG towards the end of the season.
Yeah, so the delta B for the minting of beans and soil is time weighted over the course of the season.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there is a question, Nasdaq, but yes, it is time weighted. Okay, I think we are at the end of the town hall chat questions. If anyone else has another question or any question that we didn't cover, please feel free to drop them. Publius, I wanted to go back to the earlier question, which was reducing debt or the idea of reducing debt. So maybe reducing debt through stock is not a good idea. What about reducing debt in general, or having like some debt buyback program? Is this beneficial to Beanstalk, do you think? Or Beanstalk doesn't care, just given that the debt is always doesn't have a maturity date?
So in theory, it's good to reduce debt, but in practice, not sure how it would actually be done. So the main issue is that the pods are redeemable for 1 bean each. And so the question is, if Beanstalk is going to now borrow beans to pay off pods, Beanstalk, if it has to issue more than 1 pod to borrow a bean, i.e. pay any interest, then its total debt level is going to increase. And given that none of this debt has a maturity date, there's no reason for Beanstalk to really roll that over. So perhaps the only thing that might be interesting is if Beanstalk had some sort of bid on the pod marketplace where it was always willing to buy pods at some sort of premium relative to the current temperature. So, let's say right now the temp is something like 5,400%. Therefore, Beanstalk is willing to buy beans on the secondary market back from anyone for less than 1.5 cents, which then 1.5 cents per of beans per pod, which therefore it's like, and perhaps Beanstalk would only be willing to do that when the price is above 1. So therefore, Beanstalk is maybe it doesn't even need to happen only when the price is above 1, but the concept is that would be a way for Beanstalk to reduce its debt level. But other than that, not sure what there is to do there.
Okay, and this idea can continue developing. Maybe as more and more people discuss it, we might come up with a better version of it. Okay, I think we're at the end of the town hall questions. Publius, as always, thank you for your time answering all of these questions, and thank you, Manifold, for coming on stage and also answering and taking on these questions.
Thanks for hosting, Maud.
Thank you guys for everyone for joining, and see you next week.